This series is, which I don't know how many weeks it'll be, probably just a couple, but it's entitled Jesus, the Great Philosopher. This is not an idea that's original to me. There's a book that came out recently. It's by a gentleman named Jonathan Pennington that has the same title. And this won't just be like a book report about what I read, although I have recommended the book to everybody I've met in the last 6 weeks to the extent that my wife is now sick of it and says, I'm not even going to read it. She's tired of me talking about it. But I have enjoyed it so much and gotten so much out of it, and it has changed the way that I think about the Lord. And I think that knowing some of this background and thinking through it and getting the book and reading it if you want to will enhance your view of Jesus as well. So, Richard, can you maybe go to my first slide there? So when I show you this picture, how are all these people, what are they? They're cowboys, right? We have in our culture it's a set of shorthand things that make you think cowboy, right? So you see a guy in a poncho and a cowboy hat. It's called the cowboy hat, right? Like that style of hat. You think, oh, that's a cowboy. Now, none of these people are really cowboys, right? They're the two on the right are actors, and then the folks on the left are models and George Bush. And I'm reasonably certain George Bush is not a cowboy. He owns a ranch. I'm sure he gets out there and hustles around, but he's probably got people he hires, like actual cowboys, to handle the cattle. My point here is that there's this shorthand that exists in our culture where people who are dressed a certain way, that immediately evokes the image for us of this is a cowboy, right? So, Richard, can you go to the next slide? Thanks. So, I'm going to show you a set of images next, but I wanted to give some context. These are pictures of a place in modern-day Syria called Duro Europos. It's a town that it was an outpost of a group of people called the Parthians. Has anybody heard of the Parthians? Some of you have. The Parthians were wiped out in like AD 200. They were constantly at war with the Romans and then with the Persians. But this site, Duro Europos, it sat at a crossroads of the Greek civilization, of the Romans, of the Parthians, and the Persians. Like all of them kind of mixed and mingled. It was kind of like Cincinnati sits on the edge of Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. And so, like all kinds of people mixed and matched and mingled here, and a lot of different cultures, languages, religions, in very interesting ways. It was conquered in around 200 AD, and then it lay abandoned because the people who conquered it didn't want it. And they just went on. And so it stood empty for 1,700 years until it was discovered by British soldiers in World War I. And it became one of the most well-preserved and famous archaeological sites in history because it was so well preserved. You can go to the next slide. And one of the things that they found was that there's a synagogue in Duro Europos. And it had these amazing frescoes, like paintings that were on the walls. And there was also, right down the street from the synagogue, a little house church, right? It was literally a house that had been converted into a church for these Christian weirdos in AD 200. And that was where they worshiped and studied and got together and sang hymns and spiritual songs. And they had kind of modeled what they did after what was in the synagogue. So they painted the walls of this place, and it was completely preserved. And what you see up here are representations of, so on the left top, that is Moses. On the bottom left, that's Samuel anointing David. In the middle is the prophet Ezra, and on the bottom right are two representations of Moses. He's got a different haircut in each picture. I don't know why, it's weird, but apparently he got his hair styled. If I showed you the whole mural on the right, where he's kind of pointing, there are a bunch of horses and like men in armor they're depicted as like floating. So it's the parting of the Red Sea, like the before and after of it. Do you notice anything about these guys? They all have on the same outfit, right? It's this white toga with blue striping. In the right-hand corner and it's not super visible, and it's kind of primitive compared to what was in the synagogue, is a mural from the house church. And it shows Jesus, and I wish it was in better resolution, and I could really blow it up, but it's a picture of the paralytic being brought in and healed, like the guy, his friends cut out the top of the roof and lower him down, and Jesus heals him. And if we focused in, Jesus is in that same outfit that the Old Testament prophets are, that Moses, Samuel, and Ezra are in. And to us, that's meaningless. It's like, oh, well, maybe that's how they depict prophets, or maybe that's what people wore. Maybe it's comfortable, But if we were to go down the street or to anywhere in the ancient world around that time, we would see that was the dress of a philosopher. That's how philosophers were depicted. So to these early Christians, they understood Jesus, they understood him like we understand him: ransomer, king, sacrifice, God, all of these things. But part of the bundle of concepts that they carried around with them about Jesus was that he was a philosopher. It was extremely important, right? That's how they depicted him in their art. So you say, well, so what, right? Like, what's the point of knowing that? Well, I think we have to start first by talking about what philosophy meant to ancient people, because it's very different than what it means to us. So if somebody, if you were introducing yourself to someone new tonight, and what's the first question you usually ask people? You usually say, hey, what's your name? And then, what do you do for a living? And if the answer to that question that came back at you was, well, I'm a philosopher, right? Well, you might have several thoughts, right? One of them, it would be, this guy's a weirdo, right? Like, what? Another might be, how do you make any money at that? Another might be, oh, you must teach at the university, because virtually the only thing you can do with a philosophy degree is teach philosophy. The image that we get in our modern context of a philosopher is somebody who debates questions that nobody really much cares about. I took a philosophy course when I was in undergrad, and we read an essay that I still remember because I thought, what's the point of this? And it was by a guy named Thomas Nagel. I still remember his name. That tells you how impactful this was. The name of the essay was What It Is Like to Be a Bat. And the point of it was if you want to know what it's like to be a bat, you as a human can't know that because all you can do is imagine what it would be like for a human to be a bat. So that's not the same as the experience of being a bat. And I read that and I thought, I understand what he's saying, but I don't know why I don't know why it's worth saying. Why would anybody spend their time on this? Well, to ancient people, that's not what a philosopher was. A philosopher was someone who created or proposed a life view, an idea about how you ought to live. And it has four components that I'll talk about in a minute, but there were whole schools of philosophy. Like a philosopher would announce his philosophy to people, he would talk about it, he would gather around himself like-minded people who wanted to learn from him, disciples. That's what a disciple is. It's somebody who comes and learns from a philosopher who's propounding an idea or a concept of a way to live. He would go to places and debate with other philosophers or people who had questions. And people might ask him questions, and he would respond to those and kind of draw out the implications of what he was talking about. Many philosophers spoke in parables. Right? So somebody who gathers followers together and travels about telling parables, teaching people, and talking about a new way of life. Does it sound like anybody we know? Right? So you can see why these ancient people would say, well, Jesus was a philosopher, right? He's all of these things that we talk about, but he's also somebody who is articulating an idea, a worldview, a way of living. So that's what we're going to talk about over the next week or couple of weeks, is that ancient concept that called to them, right, in this enormous way. The idea that Jesus wasn't just somebody who, wasn't just somebody who came to die for our sins, right, and rise again. He was somebody who came to tell us how to live, right? How we should see and think about the world, and then how we should react to it, and how we should live our lives, so that we have. So the aim of all philosophies, I'm going to make a big statement. The aim of all philosophies is to find the good, right? Think of the good, right? What is it like to be flourishing as a person? Right? What is it like not just to be happy, but to be a fulfilled and integrated person? That's what philosophy is about for these ancient folks. And so the idea is, well, Jesus told us, right? He told us how to be flourishing, how to be blessed. So that's what we're going to talk about over the next few weeks, or next couple weeks. So any philosophy in the ancient world has 4 components to it. And these, I can describe these using 50-cent words, but I'm not gonna, because what's the point? First of all, it has a component that talks about existence, both the things that you can see and the things that you can't see. So, big questions. How did the universe start? Why are we all alive? What's the point of life? Right? Those kind of huge, big questions. You can think of it that way. The Greeks talk in terms of physics and metaphysics. So you have like philosophers who talked about kind of scientific things, like what's the earth made of? What's the universe consist of? How do you do medicine? That kind of thing. But also, like, how was life made? Well, why do people exist? Why are people not animals? Like those kind of huge questions. The second component is knowing. How do people know things? And this sounds really, really stupid, probably, until I get into it. But the idea is, how do we understand and know things? And why? Why do people think? Third is ethics, right? Like, how are you supposed to act in light of the way that you think the universe is organized and what you know? How can you answer an ethical dilemma? So think about Jesus and think about the way that he answered many of the questions he got asked were ethical questions, right? Like when the Pharisees confronted him and they gave him this ridiculous hypothetical scenario where they say, well, what if a guy marries and then he dies and he and his wife don't have any children? The law says that he ought to marry her brother or his brother, and then she does that, and then she doesn't have any kids with him either, and then you progress kind of to the point of absurdity where she's married all 7 of this guy's brothers, and they say, well, whose wife is she? in the last day when they're all resurrected. And then Jesus has to think through the implications of that, right? That's an ethical question. Like how are we supposed to live? And you can think of many others, right? They ask him, is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar? And he says, well, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. That's an ethical decision or an ethical idea. Like, this is how you should act. And then finally, politics, a hot topic in this season, right? Like, and that's how do we act as a community? Like, how should what we know about the universe and what we understand and how we act individually, how should that impact what we do as a group? We're going to talk about all of these things and kind of what Jesus's philosophy was with respect to all of them. So probably some of you are like, why are we doing this? Like, what's the point of this? Well, I have a couple of reasons for that, and a couple of reasons I was really impacted by the book and why I wanted to teach kind of this idea. I think there is a hole in the church, not our church specifically, but churches in general. I ministered to and taught. I call them kids, but they're young adults at the college and career sort of level for many years in this church. And it's kind of scary, but I have a kid who's sort of reaching that age myself right now, as some of you do. And then, of course, I grew up in this church. And I can tell you that the pattern is almost invariable, right? Kids, they grow up in church. They're very involved in the programs. They're very, they hang out with friends here. They're super involved. And then they reach a point where mom and dad aren't telling them to come anymore. And they go to college or they get a job. And suddenly you don't see them anymore, right? They fall out of church. And it's not that they weren't believers. It's not that they don't believe now. It's that I think churches in general do a pretty poor job of teaching that Christianity is a whole life philosophy. It's about how you're to live your life and be integrated in everything that you do, right? Christ has something to say about every aspect of your life. I can count on probably two hands, but no more, the number of people who grew up in the teen class with me and still go to church at all. And again, it's not that their faith is less than the people who remain. It's not that they didn't believe in the first place. It's that at some point what we teach here became irrelevant to them, and it's because oftentimes, as in our culture, our church culture, our evangelical culture in general, we don't emphasize Jesus as propounding a whole life philosophy. I firmly believe that. So that's one reason. And the second is, I think there's a hole in our theology. We talk a lot about Christ as our risen Redeemer, right? Think of the songs that we sing. Think of the way that we preach and teach about Jesus. It's so often about His work on the cross as redeeming us from sin, and His work, emerging from the tomb as defeating death. And that's true. It's not an untrue thing, and we should focus on it. But we're often, I think, very worried about what will happen to people when they die. Right? The answer we always ask, or the question we always ask is, do you right now know where you would go if you died tonight? That's a question we often ask when we're evangelizing. And when I read what Jesus has to say, I don't find Him asking that question very often. What I see Him asking is not, are you going to go to heaven when you die? I see Him asking, are you going to bring heaven to earth while you live? right? That's the issue, right? That's the point that he is making in almost everything that he does is, and we'll talk about this in a moment, is how are you going to bring heaven to earth right now? I told Tony earlier that I was, it's weird to say that you enjoyed a funeral, but I did. Mrs. Denoff's funeral I thought was really touching and kind of amazing. And it was for this very reason that nobody got up here and talked about how she died and went to heaven. Everything that was said up here was about how she brought heaven to earth, right? How people who knew her knew that there was something different, and how they glimpsed Jesus through her. I can't think of a better testimony than when I was around that person, I felt like I got a glimpse of heaven. That's what people ought to say about us as believers. I can't think of anything sadder than, I think he made a decision when he was like 20. And he's 80 years old and he passed away. And I think he made a decision back then. Well, if he didn't make people feel like they were seeing heaven through him, I don't know, right? I mean, that's the question. So with that, I want to read what I think is the Constitution, is Jesus's biggest contribution to philosophy. It's the Sermon on the Mount. And we're going to go through it, but to me, this is Christ's manifesto, right? It's where he's talking about what the kingdom of heaven looks like. See, when he was teaching on earth, he often used that phrase, the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God, and he would talk about what it was going to look like. Right? And it looked a lot like what the prophets talked about in Ezekiel and Amos and Isaiah, right? It's a place where justice rolls down like water, according to Ezekiel. I always like that phrase. It's a place where everything sad comes untrue. It's a place where love never has to deal with grief, and joy is never pierced with sorrow. Right? It's a place of undiluted love and joy and light. And he talks about it all the time, right? And it's in the future, right? It's far away. It's in the future. But as Jesus talks, it becomes now, right? He's saying the kingdom it's not coming. It's not after you die. It's not in the future. It's here. It's present right now in our midst. Right? And you look at all the suffering and evil in the world, and you start to wonder, how could that be? Well, what he meant is it's in you. Right? Like you are supposed to live your life according to a philosophy that presents the kingdom of heaven to people and makes them feel like that far distant reality is here now. The kingdom of heaven is an invasion from the future. Right? It's the life of the kingdom in you, making itself abundant in the lives of other people. And I always, those of you who have heard me teach have heard me tell this boring story before, but I'm going to tell it anyway because I like it. And it's a real contrast with the way that Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven. So Alexander the Great, the greatest general who ever lived. You've all heard this story, right? Because you've heard me teach, so you're okay. Don't zone out, please. I love it. He's the greatest general who ever lived. When he was 33, he reached the oceans of India, further than anybody had ever gone before. He conquered India, right, from Greece. And he collapses on a rock, and he starts to cry. And his men come to him, and they say, "Kyrios, Lord, what's wrong?" And he says, "I've conquered the whole earth, and I'm weeping because the gods made only one." Right? He wants more, always more. So he's dying in conquered Babylon of dysentery, probably. And his men ask him, who will rule after, because it's very clear he's going to die. Who will rule after you, they say. And he's clearly dying, and they say, will it be your son? His son hadn't been born yet. His son was still in the womb. Or will it be your brother? his brother Philip was, we would think of him as developmentally handicapped? Or will it be one of us? And his dying words were, "To kratistos," to the strongest. That's the way of the kingdoms of the world, right? That's the way that the earth expects things to operate. Power goes to the strongest. Kind of hilariously, that there was a general named Krataros who wasn't at the meeting, and he said, "Well, Alexander must have said my name." And the others were like, "No, he totally said to the strongest. It goes to show you what my boss always said, which is that the world belongs to those who show up at the meetings. Right? You got to be there, or else you're going to miss out on your opportunity. I say this and tell you this story because it's a contrast to Jesus. The world into which Jesus was born thought that power should go to the strongest, whoever can win. And if we think about it, right, that's how the world operates now. And that's true whether you want it to be or not. Right? The acquisition of power and strength is the most important thing in the lives of most people, whether they would articulate it that way or not. But Jesus has a different way. So let's turn to the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew chapter 5. As I said, this is a manifesto. It's Jesus declaring what the kingdom is like. And he says, so verse 1, "And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came unto him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The word blessed here is makarios in Greek. You can also translate it flourishing or good, right? Keep that in mind as we talk about philosophy next week, right? If the purpose of philosophy is to teach you how to flourish. And the word that he's using here is, you will flourish if you are poor in spirit. Verse 4, "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works, and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. And whosoever shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. So we're going to get into this a little bit next week, but I want to focus on what scholars call the macarisms, or the blessing sayings here in the first few verses, right? If you're thinking and living in the system of the world, right, where victory and power and prestige and gain go to the strongest, right, to kratistos, this will read to you or parse out to you as nonsense, right? Who wants to live in a kingdom with the poor in spirit in the morning, and the pure in heart. Who wants that? Sounds like a kingdom of sad sacks. In fact, there's an interesting book called Kingdom of Nobodies that explores the Sermon on the Mount. If we went and read in Luke, you would see that the theme of Luke, the whole book, is about reversals. Right? It's about the idea that the kingdom that Jesus comes to preach is filled with refugees and immigrants and poor people. Right? That's where Jesus starts. He's not born in a palace. Right? He's born in a manger. We just got through the Christmas season. All of the blessing statements are a manifesto that says this kingdom is not like any kingdom that can exist in the world. Right? It's a future kingdom that is filled with people who are mourning, but they're comforted. People who hunger and thirst after righteousness in the present age, and then they're filled. It's filled with people who are merciful, which Alexander would have seen as a flaw, right? But they obtain mercy because of their attitude, right? It's filled with the kind of justice and light and love that's foretold by the Old Testament prophets, and then brought forward into the present time, right? Because this isn't just about that future kingdom. He's not saying one day these things will happen to you. He's saying live right now like it's happening. Right? Fake it till you make it. Live right now like the kingdom is here, because it is, in the form and person of Jesus Christ. And when you do that, people will understand they'll catch an echo of that future kingdom, and they'll be drawn into the light and love and light that you bring with you. So I'm actually going to stop there, because I could get on to the four categories that I talked about, that is existence, knowledge, ethics, and politics, but I don't want to leave off in the middle of one of those. I hope this is somewhat useful to you. It's about big ideas, necessarily. But those early Christian weirdos in Duro Europus, the guys who thought we should draw Jesus on the walls of our home where we worship, those people, this meant a lot to them, this idea, right? That Christ was articulating something different. He was saying something different to them than they could find in the world. There's a reason that Christianity continues to exist 2,000 years later, right? It's because we are different. People can detect that. They can understand it.